welcome back to the NCMU podcast, where we are committed to raising up the next generation of nerd culture ministers and missionaries. Didn't get it wrong that time. My name is Mark, and I am one of the two hosts between Bubba and I am joined today by a good friend and a fellow staffer at Lux Digital Church. We got a couple of Lux Digital Church staffers coming on the show to talk about what they do on Lux's staff, and also a little bit about their background and what brought them to join Lux's staff. So today I am joined by Dalton, or Pastor Druzi, from the Lux Digital Church server. Dalton, welcome to the show.
Yo, what up, dude? I'm excited about this. Thanks for bringing me on.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on, and we're going to talk today a little bit about cultivating and building online community. But before we do that, help us to get to know you a little bit, man.
Awesome, man. Yeah, so I'm 34, been in ministry for about 14 years now. Been at Lux only since June of last year, so not very long, but loving it, excited about it. God's doing cool things here. But before that, I was a youth pastor. I was a kids pastor. I was a camp director. So I've kind of been all over. I grew up in 9 states, went to 13 schools. So had that experience, stepped out of a Secret Service. You know, we ate with presidents, did all kinds of crazy things, got to experience all kinds of life. Did about every sport thing you could ever imagine growing up. Was just always active, grew up in a broken home, became a Christian in middle school. God really showed me at an early age through the men in my life that I wanted to be in ministry. Not a normal thing in middle school to think about, but what I always wanted to do was be a youth pastor. Got to live that out, got to serve God in that way. It was a blessing to me and my wife and our 4 kids. And now I'm doing digital ministry, which has been really honestly awesome. It was like I was collecting the infinity stones over the last couple of years and finally got a snap when it all made sense. So it's been really dope.
Yeah, I had a similar experience to that when we were thinking about starting Lux. And it was like suddenly all of these various things that I've been passionate about, interested in, and pseudo trained in. A lot of it was self-training, right? It was just like I became interested in podcasting at some point, and then, you know, as
all youth pastors do.
Yeah, I think all of us do, right? I became interested in a handful of different things. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, all of these skills actually prepared me for this thing online that I didn't know that we were supposed to do. And now, 4 years later, and you said you started in June on staff. Technically, right?
Technically, yeah. Technically, I started a lot longer than that, actually. But yeah. You started back in, August, September of 2023. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about that and what spurred you to start growing an interest in online. Because originally you found Lux, but it wasn't because you were like, someone told you Lux Digital Church exists and you came and found us. It was, you had an interest in online ministry for a really good reason that caused you to come upon what we were doing. Yeah, man. So let me give you a little bit of background. So I've always been a gamer. I've always been interested in online things. It's been a big part of my ministry. If you talk to any of my parents in the past that their kids have been in my ministry, tech is a very big, important part of just who I am, and utilizing that, especially with Generation Z and millennials, who is what I've served. It's kind of a third arm for them. So I never wanted to take it away from them. I wanted it to be a part of, like, let's teach them how to use it for the Lord and all those things. So because of that, I've always been interested in tech and online and figuring out how to use that for ministry. And I've spent a lot of my life in the digital spaces. So a lot of my best friends are people that I've never met in person. And I know that's kind of weird and hard for some people to understand, but for those of us that are digital natives, man, I love the people that I know online that I've only ever known online. And one of my best friends, Josh, is a guy that I played League of Legends with. It's actually the biggest game in the world. You don't need to know really all the details of it, but it's just a really big game played in tons of countries. So popular that the esports version of it sold out the Staples Center, the Lakers Stadium, in 5 minutes once for one of its tournaments, something the Lakers haven't been able to do until Luka showed up this past week. But it's something that honestly has just been really cool and a big part of my life. But my buddy Josh, one day, I've known him for 10 years playing this game together, and he knows I'm a pastor. He knows about ministry. I've prayed with him before, but I just felt a burden for the gospel for him, just to one day offer it to him and see what God does with it. And I just started beginning to pray, like, God, I feel this burden you've put on me for Josh. I really care deeply for Josh. Give me an opportunity to share the gospel. And one day during one of the games we were playing, Josh is a rambunctious guy. He's passionate. He's excited. And he's starting to talk to me. And I see this opening. The Holy Spirit points like, hey, here's the moment. So I shared the gospel with him and he's quiet. And I was like, okay, he lost internet. Josh is never quiet. Like, what is this? And Josh goes, man, I need this. And I go, oh, okay. All right, let's talk about that. So we talked through the gospel. He gave his life to Christ. It was an awesome moment. And we started walking with each other, reading the Bible, discipling him, all these things. And I was like, man, this is so cool. I'm doing this all online. This is so neat. But we got to the book of Acts after reading through the whole Bible together, which is so dope. We got to the book of Acts and he was like, man, I need church. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what you should like see in the book of Acts. So we started searching for churches in his area, and the area that he's in is a rural part of Northeast America or North America and the United States. And how many ways can I say that? And we
get the idea. Yeah.
We looked for churches and we couldn't find one in his area. And that's really common in the Northeast. But for him, I was like, he's a digital native. He spends most of his life online. He goes to work at an 8 to 5 day job all day. And then he comes home and he games. I was like, maybe there's a church online, right? Like you hear of people, my church that I was a part of, we pressed play on Facebook. We did all the things, but I was looking for something that was a little more. And I was like, he watches Twitch. So we found Lux actually just by searching digital church or church. And I went to check it out first, just as a friend to see what it was like, to make sure that, everything was, straight and narrow and that the gospel was the main focus. And I fell in love with Lux. I remember the night that I watched my first time. I actually went into the pastor's room with you in our Discord and chatted with you. And it was like, okay, I'm looking for Josh, but I think this found me. And we started our journey talking together. Shortly after that, it wrecked me. My wife and I went on a 16-hour drive to go visit her family in Kansas. We were in Georgia at the time. And during that drive, we both had been praying and had been talking that our time in youth ministry was coming to an end. And we were talking about what's next. And I said, I think it's this digital thing. Is this weird? And she's like, well, not really. Like, it's not that weird. She's like, we should pray about it. So we did. I ended up talking to you. We started meeting on Wednesdays, talking about what it looks like to plant a fully digital church. And then eventually God led us to the point where we both realized that it wasn't about me planning. It was about me joining the staff here at Lux.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was, a season of discernment also, but also it was pretty quick. Like all things.
That's how I do things, man.
Considered, yeah, all things considered, it was a pretty quick turnaround. NCMS year one in 2023 became a catalyst for that. We had Dalton come out to that and got to spend some time with him. And at that point, we were really at the first guy that I met online that I felt like could do this, right? That had the chops to raise the money, had the resiliency to push through. And I've met a lot of people in the space who I felt like, man, they felt like they were maybe called to plant a church online, start a ministry online, start a stream online. And I was like, I'm not 100, you talk to people and I don't ever want to be judgmental or limit what God can do through somebody's life. God can do anything that he wants. But once you're in the space and you've done it for a little bit, you also recognize a little bit of what it takes to make it work. And so Dalton was the first person that I talked to, and I told him this, that I felt like you could do this on your own. At NCMS, it became clear that either there was going to be another church out there with a senior pastor that I really vibed with, and we would get along really well, or Dalton just needed to join our staff at Lux. But part of the catalyst for that for me was knowing your experience in cultivating healthy online communities before. You've joined our staff as the pastor of Community and Discipleship, overseeing small groups, gaming ministries, devotional teams. A big bulk of that, though, right, has been how do we increase engagement in the server? And I would say that our server was very different upon you starting to become more interactive in there. But the numbers would say the same thing, with almost like 3 times the number of messages sent in our Discord over the course of this last year. with only like a 13% increase in growth. So for the record, I don't know, we were 750 some people at the end of 2023. The end of 2024, we're looking almost 900 people in the server. That isn't a huge margin of growth. It is a small amount, but it isn't enormous. But we're seeing from like 40 or 50,000 messages sent, I can't remember what the number was, to over 180,000 messages sent in 2024. And so huge jump in the amount of engagement and the number of hours spent in voice chats. It's largely been from Dalton's influence on our church and the leaders he has in place and the structures that have been put in place, but also just because of you drawing people in and increasing people's engagement with one another, relationships being built. So talk to me a little bit about kind of cutting your teeth in the previous community that you led.
Yeah, so this isn't the first digital community that I've been a part of. Obviously, like I said, I've been a part of many smaller digital communities, whether it's gaming groups. I've played in tournaments, all kinds of stuff. But back to that game of League of Legends. So it was kind of funny. COVID changed a lot for me, just like it changed a lot for everyone in ministry. But it was the first great awakening, if we'll say it that way, into digital ministry for me. I remember one day our church would shut down, just like all youth pastors at the time. I quickly learned how to take our church online, all those things. But I had some downtime because we just didn't do a lot of things outside of some ministry things throughout one or two things throughout the week. So I was looking on Facebook at the time because Facebook streaming was sort of a thing. And I found this guy named Zeke who was streaming League of Legends. He was a Christian and he was talking about his faith. And I was like, sweet, man. So I jumped in chat, started talking with him, instantly fell in love with this guy. It was like a Jonathan David situation. Like I fell in love with just his passion, his heart. We became great friends. We've now seen each other, met each other. We're still in contact, all these things. But Zeke and I ended up starting a Discord server, which is just a online community, very similar to what Lux does outside of, like, obviously Lux is a church, but like what we started was mainly around this game called League of Legends. But the main thing behind it was we wanted to share our love of Jesus with guys in the community, because League is known as one of the most toxic places in the gaming world. And as we were connecting with people, it was a big part of my job to create community there. So Zeke was heading off a lot of the vision, a lot of that stuff, but my job was gathering. And to be honest, it's just, I could teach a lot of things about gathering, but also a big part of it is just kind of who God makes you to be. There's certain people that are gatherers. You're one of those people. I mean, I've seen it time and time again here at Lux. I've seen it outside of Lux. You're a gatherer, and I appreciate that because I think that's one reason we connect. But for Zeke and I, at the LOL Midwest, which is still a server, it looks totally different than when it was in our hands, so to say. But, man, we just focused on loving people and sharing who Jesus is and what he's about. But we were also doing it in a very relational gaming way. We just game with people. They found out we actually cared. We weren't just like Christians that wanted to use this for the gospel. We were Christians that really loved the game. And then as we built relationships with people, it was amazing to see internationally the people we were reaching, and the tournaments we were holding and all these things, and how people would come and talk to us about faith out of nowhere just because they knew we were Christian guys. And they're like, wait, you're really good at this game, but also you love Jesus. Like, how does this make sense? And we would talk to them and we would share our faith and we'd share the gospel. And man, I spent so many times doing exactly what I was doing as a youth pastor, being up at night, praying with guys at 3 a.m. about their marriages, about the struggles with addictions they were going through and all those things, and walking them through the scriptures. And the cool thing is, like, some of those relationships have continued to a point where some of those guys are even here at Lux with us now, which has really been dope. So yeah.
One of the things that you said in there, Dalton, I think is so important, was this idea of, hey, these guys recognized that we didn't just want to use this, but we genuinely loved the game. I think Christians in general, especially in this space, can kind of, and you'll see this, you'll see a very noticeable difference. Now, of course, there's the gatherer concept. There's the leader, blessing of leadership. There's spiritual gifting that enables people to do things in this space pretty well. However, you will notice that a lot of the guys who are doing this missionally, a lot of the girls who are doing this missionally, genuinely love the thing that they're creating for. And that 100%. Is an attractive thing. I think that the church very frequently falls into this trap of like, well, Twitch is a tool. And how many churches have I heard talk about this? How do we get on Twitch? It's a tool to reach gamers. What are the tools we need to reach gamers? And the tool is you have to actually like what they're doing.
Gaming.
Right. So our calling to Twitch came out of the fact that I had spent 7 years in Twitch streams watching Hafu and Reynad and many others play endless hours of Hearthstone. I had been part of those communities, right? These are the places that I went and I hung out, right? Eventually straying into the Elder Scrolls Legends community and watching guys like my now very close personal friend Dead Broke Nerd and watching guys like Jamie and watching guys like all of these, Alois, all of these characters now that nobody knows anything about because the game's dead and they stopped streaming. But I was very much so a part of that community. And so when Lux was birthed, it was not this thing where it's like, hey, these people are using this tool to try to get to me. It's like, no, they live here. They love this. You can't fake that. And League is definitely a game you cannot fake loving. You cannot pretend to love League. You will be out of it very quickly.
Yeah. And most people here at Lux know just, obviously I'm very passionate about it. And I think that's something, even here at our church, that's something we call them table setters, our volunteers, so to say, that are there to create little communities here at Lux, with the intentionality of helping people take next steps in their faith. I tell them all the time, if you're going to set a table, you have to be passionate about that table. Mm-hmm. You first and foremost need to be passionate about the gospel and live with the gospel intentionality. But second, you actually have to like the thing. Like if we're going to do an arts and crafts table, right, where we're connecting around the hobby and we're utilizing that as a tool for the gospel, you actually have to like arts and crafts.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things that Lux has really been powerful with, is not because I'm some amazing leader. It's just we've found people that fit tables. We have so many awesome people here at Lux that just honestly love the things they love, but they see that their love for this can help them connect with others, whether Christians or people that are far from God. Man, we've had so many stories of that here at Lux, of people that absolutely are against everything, but find community in the game, in the hobby that has led to faith conversations. I could think of one young lady that was a League player that was adamant against what we were doing, but she saw we loved the game. And then through that, we were able to connect with her and show her, man, Jesus is different than you think. And it was so cool to be able to love and serve her and see God work in her life because of it.
Yeah, and I can echo that through, there's many stories like that through Lux. I think one of the coolest ones from an area that I'm passionate about, a year or two and a half years ago, Lux launched a ministry and an outreach for Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. And one of the first people to come into the server just for that was Shadow. And he wouldn't be afraid of me sharing his story at all. And he had just gone through a handful of losses in their family. Several family members had passed away. And we really began an opportunity to minister to Shadow and just meet him where he is. Nobody tried to force the gospel on him. Nobody tried to evangelize him. We just built a relationship with him. And I still don't have an expectation that Shadow would do anything differently, but he reached out to me this year and said, hey, I'm going to try to experience some of the spiritual stuff at Lux. He's been playing D&D with us for 2.5 years, right?
Yeah.
He has multiple high-level characters in our guild. And
which takes time.
It takes time. It does. It takes a lot of hours. And so he joined a small group this year, bought a Bible this year, has been coming to church services and lurking with us, or just even sometimes just being there, active in the chat. And we've been able to connect. I don't think he would confess and say he's a Christian by any means.
Totally.
But he's exploring for the first time in a long time. And that's been based off the fact that it's like, hey, we didn't try to create a D&D game that just tried to put Jesus at the center of every story. We've just been playing D&D together because I freaking love D&D. And so, and I've been playing it for years. And so, and like him, he also loves it. And so through that shared space, we've been able to build a relationship that's resulted now in lots of deep spiritual conversations over DMs. This is the power of community. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking about starting a podcast, you're thinking about making content, and you think, oh, the really cool part about this is I can do ministry and I can stream. Let me tell you, very quickly, you will run out of time to stream if you're seeking to actually do ministry. Relationships are the bedrock of where the church exists. It's the bedrock of where ministry happens. It's the bedrock of where discipleship happens. It is not just sort of like a guy on the road or on the street corner with a bullhorn and a sign saying, come to Jesus and repent. It is deeply relational, deep investment. So, Dalton, talk a little bit to me about now some of your philosophy around community development and things at Lux, because I think that our community on Discord and the relationships that are there are really the thing that has caused growth, sustainability, discipleship, salvations, like all of the hallmarks of what a church would want to be are happening. I think not because we have a live stream or because we have nice cameras, or big personalities, but because of the community that's developed. So talk to me a little bit about how you've gone about cultivating that, and what have been maybe some of the aha moments of online community that you're like, man, yeah, if I was doing this again, we would start this earlier or do this sooner.
Love that. So I'm going to take us offline real quick. So I grew up, like I said, in 9 states, but part of it, a big chunk of it is the Midwest. And now I live in the Midwest again in Kansas. And one of my favorite groups of people to be around is farmers. And I think scripturally we see farming used all the time about like, man, plowing the fields, like planting seeds, all of those things. Well, in community building, what I've learned over my short amount of years in ministry, 10 plus years, but still pretty short compared to a lot of people.
Long compared to vast majority of people. Well,
maybe very few
people have 15 years under their belt.
If it doesn't feel long for me, but anyways, like, what I've seen is that community is the long game, just like farming, right? You plant a seed and you wait for months in hope that it's going to produce fruit. And community building here, to go back online, like community building here at Lux is a long game. It's not something that we're just in it for the short game. If you want to know what digital ministry takes, it takes time. And I think that's one of the things that's the most underrated. I sat down with a church not too long ago, and he loves everything God is doing at Lux. And I'm really grateful for that. I'm grateful for his support. I love that church, all those things. And one of the responses was like, how much money can we throw at it to make it work? I said, it's not about the money. It's about the time. Like, yeah, it takes money, but the startup for digital ministry actually is much lower than a physical building or anything like that. If anything, that's one of the biggest pros to starting one. But one of the things that is just flat out it's going to take time and intentionality. And that's the two of the things we preach the most when it comes to community building here at the church, is that it's going to take time and it's going to take you walking and being patient. And one of the things that Lux has had in its DNA way before me is this idea that we're guides, we're not heroes. I think a lot of time in ministry that we take on this stance of being a hero. Like, we are the ones that are writing the story. We're the ones making all the big moves, all those things. But I believe I heard Mark you one time in a podcast to bring it to a nerdy side, said we're much more like Yoda. We're much more letting people wrestle with their faith and wrestle with things as we're walking and talking with them. We're not necessarily giving them all the answers. We're walking with them. And at Lux, that's very true. I mean, we guide people all the time in their faith, not giving them everything, but pointing them to where they could find the answers. And one of the most beautiful parts of our community is that we really kind of funnel our tables, and we've really just started preaching this heavily with our small groups, that we believe obviously our foundation is Jesus. It's the gospel, and we want to live intentionally with that. But we also believe our community needs to be safe, committed, and intentional. And a big part of that is safe is a place where you could come ask questions. You could come talk about hard things. You could come knowing that whatever is said to people isn't going to leave this place. And we're going to not treat you differently for coming with some really hard things. That's been evident in our addiction group that Mark leads with, how many guys are in that addiction group? There's probably about over the last year, probably about 20 different guys.
I think we've had 13 guys who've been part of the group so far.
Awesome. So yeah, I mean, what an awesome opportunity for us online to be loving and serving those that are struggling with addictions. But committed, man, we talk about being committed all the time. If you say you're going to do something, do it, be all in with it. And that's an important thing. It's a big churchy word, and I get that, but it is true. Like, show up, do the things that you need to do, show up, not just in time, but in your whole body. Like, be there present spiritually, mentally, emotionally, all those things. And the final one is intentional. We ask all of our people to be intentional with community. If they're going to be a part of something, man, be there for the others, not just there for yourself. And when you kind of mix all that together, man, it makes a beautiful recipe for community. We've seen it time and time again that when people start to connect, they start to come out of lurk, if we're going to use online terms, they come out of the shadows, so to say, and they start making themselves known. Man, when they start making themselves known, our people are aware of it. They love on them, they care for them, and they walk with them. And that's that long game, man. Digital ministry, it's great, but it's long, hard work.
Let's talk really quickly about, let's say, okay, I think people would look at us and say, that's great for you. You have a guy who literally devotes 50 hours a week to doing this.
100%.
I have a job, and I'm listening to this podcast. I have a job. I have a spouse. I have kids. I'm streaming 3 nights a week on the side because I want to do this missionally. I want to share the gospel. I'm sitting here, 10, 15 people, maybe 30, 40 people who are watching my stream a couple days a week. We have a Discord server, but man, I do not have the time to invest in actually building up this community that you're talking about. So here's the reality. You have 50 hours a week. You also do not have enough time to build the type of community that's happening at our church, right?
No.
So let's talk a little bit about how to cultivate a culture where community is not the exception, but is the rule. And how do you actually help and train people to build community when you're not always we have lots of communities that are meeting that you're not even in the room with.
Yeah, actually, if I'm being honest, I learned years ago that I can't be in everything, and I don't need to be in everything. It's actually really good for me not to be in everything. It's really healthy for my family. My wife really appreciates when I'm not in everything. There was a time in ministry where I tried to be, but the more mature I get in my faith, the more I realize that, man, I am not superhero. I'm not a Superman, right? Like, I have to hand off things. So here at Lux, one of the ways we cultivated that right off the bat was I just spent time with a handful of people. I got to hear what they loved and what they were passionate about. I got to pour into them and their faith. I got to encourage them. And then after that, I got to say, hey man, you really like this thing. What would you think about table setting this? And it's been so cool. Like, that's how we've grown our team. It's been very, very intentional in that. You'll hear that word intentional a lot because I've been looking for people and what they're into. And then saying, this person, they have a pretty strong faith, or maybe they're growing in their faith. I think this could be a really stretching moment for them. So I've found guys like our Boots. Boots is one of our guys here at the church. He wouldn't mind me talking about him, but he loves the game of League as well. And I saw that early on. I was like, man, you're a busy guy. You have a busy job. Like, at the time he was with the UPS and he was running around all day long. But he loved people and he wanted to connect. And I was like, man, what do you think about just leading a game or two every week and just talking with people and praying with them? And that's turned into much more awesome things that he's doing and turned into him wanting to be a digital missionary himself and all these things. but it's just about getting to know your people and spending time with them and encouraging them to take a step. And how that looks simply is I've just gotten to know people. You've gotten to know people because you've done this too before me. And you just start to hear what's on their heart. You just start to listen. And I think that's a big part of being a leader in building community is listening. I love to talk. I'm a talker. My mom always said that, the hardest thing about Dalton is getting him to be quiet. But the more I learn about being a leader, it's about listening. And the more I've grown in ministry, it's not some special thing. It was really just turning off my mouth and just turning on my ears. So you could read all the books in the world, but just listen. Listening is a very important part of ministry and building community.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think that if you're sitting around, you're also struggling saying, I don't know how to do this on my own. I think if I read between the lines a little bit, what I see is there has to be some level of intentionality investment in this. Like it's not just going to happen. If you want to focus around community, I think it was Harris Heller this year who announced that his Discord community you shared this with me, was going to be focused around community development rather than sort of like promotion, social stuff. Right. And so even some of the biggest creators and influencers in the content creation space are recognizing the importance of people connecting to one another. And that takes sacrifice. And so that might mean that, your plan to stream 3 nights a week becomes streaming 1 night a week or 2 nights a week. And you spend a night just hanging out in your Discord server, playing games with people instead of live streaming it and entering into some conversations, getting to know people, setting up a time to meet with people one-on-one. And in my experience, the offer makes all the difference. It makes all the difference. People don't think they have access to you. And so if you let them know that they do, it makes all the difference. I think that all of the pastoral staff at Lux, we all spend time every single week, just one-on-one calls with people, hearing their stories, some people who are new to us, some people who've been part of our church for a while. And are we ministering to those people? Well, sure, to a certain extent, yes. But we're also getting to know them, building relationship with them. And community is one of those things that you're like, man, it feels elusive and I don't have it. And then one day you wake up, there's a moment of need or something just clicks and you're like, oh, I don't actually know what I would do without this. And then it's like, oh, community has happened. And I didn't even know that I was building it all this time. But it doesn't happen overnight, and it does take time to do.
Yeah. And I had a mentor of mine growing up early in ministry that told me, community isn't sexy, right? Like it's something that is just hard work, grinding work. You come in with your shirt dirty because it takes time and effort. There's a lot of things in ministry that we could do that are really flashy and really exciting and all that stuff. But community is something the church does extremely well when it's intentional. And it's the thing that I think is the most important when it comes to just connecting with people. It's the thing that really does build on itself and spreads the gospel further than anything else we could do. So takes time, takes effort, but it's so worth it.
Mm-hmm. Well, we like to close out our shows by asking a pretty simple question. I think a lot of people, it's hard to answer, easy to ask. A lot of people who are considering getting into this, and you went through this, are like, is this really me wanting this, or is this God wanting me to do this thing? Because it is so frequently that this type of ministry is just so closely knit to areas of passion that we already have, that it's easy to think, well, God isn't really calling me to this. I just want to do this. And I'll be honest, I have seen people come in and out of the space who came in originally saying God told me to do this. They realized, nope, this was just me wanting to do it. And I've seen some people come back in and be like, God had to really do some work on me to get me to the place where I was ready to be involved here. And it wasn't about me and it wasn't about my platform. You and your family had to count that cost in a pretty significant way, in the fact that you left your job. You guys came on our staff after months of fundraising for yourselves. We did not have the money to pay you to bring you on staff. We were already overstaffed in terms of our budget. And so, virtually up until this year, and maybe even into this year, every cent that you've been paid, you have brought in yourself through conversations and relationships, taking a step out of a good paying and reliable income when you have a wife and 4 kids is nerve-wracking. You guys have made huge sacrifices. You've moved across the country, all those sorts of things. There has to be a conviction deep down that drives that type of action. So talk to me a little bit about the discernment process for you and your family that said, yeah, I think this is definitely what God's asking us to do.
Yeah, I love that. I think counting the cost is such an important thing. You know, my wife and I have always tried to faith things out. But we also have probably more often than not, we probably should have logically thought some things out, but faithing things out for us has always looked about like just praying about things and talking about it, but also just realizing that, you know, God has equipped us in a way that is different than some other people. And the way that we've been equipped is really helpful for the ministry, and that the passions, likes, all those things are things that, you know, God can use, and I believe wanted to use. And even if it looked a lot different than the last season, we knew that, man, there was a great need online. And we saw that burden. I think that burden's an important part of this, is that I didn't just want to go because I like gaming and I know people need Jesus. I actually felt burdened for the lost online. I felt burdened for those, you know, man, our church is full of people that have been hurt by the church and don't ever want to walk through the doors of the church again. So I felt burdened for those people, because I want to see the flock return. You know, I want to see the sheep return to the flock. So that was really big on both my wife and I's heart. And I used to look at missionaries and be like, man, those suckers, like they have to raise their funds. Like I would never want to do that. And here I am, I'm doing it because I believe that God cares so much for those online. You know, at Lux means light. And we talk all the time about like, we want to be a light for every dark place. And this idea of being a light in this space that really is so dark, but it's so vast too. We can't do it alone. Lux can't be the only church in this space. We talk about that a lot too. We're grateful for all our friends that are doing it in this space, but I just wanted to play my part. My wife and I talked about like the big sea. It's a big ship, and we saw the island that needed help on the side. And even if the big ship can't turn quick enough to like meet that needs, God has equipped us to jump off the ship and swim over to that island. And for us, that was really important. So we counted the costs. You know, it was a financial hit, but that's okay, because ministry was so much more important than that. God was going to take care of us. And one of the things that I think you have to count in this space is that sometimes the things you're passionate about that are actually really helpful in this space are things, and you told me this early on, are things that you have to lay on the altar. I actually probably game less for me now than I've ever gamed before. A lot of my hobbies and passions and things I like are actually much more gospel focused now than just like rest and relaxation after a hard day. And that sometimes can be a difficult thing to have to wrestle with. But at the same time, it's become a really beautiful thing as I've learned how to, you know, find margin and rest in other ways.
I love that. Yeah. And you're certainly right. There's things that you're going to have to, it takes resiliency, it takes grit, but there's things that you're going to have to offer up and sacrifice. You know, when I got into this, I naively thought, well, this is really cool. I can make streaming part of my job. And for the first couple of years I did. In 2024, when Dalton joined our staff and Andy joined our staff, and Andy will be on in a future episode, talking about branding and just creative endeavors in the space and how to do that really well. The thing that went on the altar was streaming for me. That was the next thing that God was like, you have to give this up. I enjoyed it. I loved doing it. I liked connecting with people. I had my own channel, and it hasn't been active in over a year. That was a sacrifice for me that was like, I don't really want to give this up, but ministry will call you into that. And if you're not called to this, there are things that you love that you won't be willing to give up, that you have to give up. And so I think the process of discernment to decide, am I called to this? And I love some of the stuff that you shared even earlier, Dalton, about, hey, we took this long drive. We prayed about it. We saw all of the things that lined up. My wife and I were on the same page. We were aligned in this. We ran the numbers and saw that it was possible. Then you took that step of faith. You know, I think all of those things have been echoed throughout our other creators as well, who have stepped out, especially those who are doing it full time, where they've stepped out and they've said, okay, God has spoken to me in multiple ways. And and those ways have lined up. And so this wasn't just me anymore. This was, I saw God speak to me through others. I saw God speak to me through scripture. I saw God speak to me through prayer. I saw God speak to me through unity with my family. And you're speaking to all of those things as well. Seeing the skill set, seeing all that stuff line up. Love all of that. Okay, let's close out this episode. But I would love to ask, the last question is, give me the one real, it's great. We're talking about community, pie in the sky, 10,000 foot view for the most part. We've gotten some like real clear instructions. Let's just give me one thing. Let's say, assuming that I'm a creator, I want to do this missionally, but I want to make disciples. Give me the one thing that I could practically do this week.
Yeah, practically do. So if you're already creating content, I think you find the person that's most engaged with your content and reach out to them and just get to know them. I think that's one of the things I learned from streaming on my own time pre-Lux. It's been something I've learned in ministry throughout my life, is that I always would find that if it's youth ministry, I'd find that one kid that seems to be the most interested in what we're doing and connect with them. And sometimes God brought the kid that was least interested, and that's a Holy Spirit thing. But I think practically, I think one of the best ways to start is find the person that's most involved. It's the person that comments on all your YouTube videos. It's the person that likes all your stuff. It's the person that says, hey, in chat first, or the most, or something like that. And just find them and just see why they're interested in what you're doing, and see where God takes that conversation, because you'll find time and time again that person would love to be involved. They just don't even know that's an option. And that's one of the coolest things of empowering people to be kingdom workers alongside you, is to help them realize, like, man, you love this thing like I do. Like, come do it with me. Come work the fields with me.
Love that. I think that some people look at that and be like, well, then it's taking me away from streaming or doing my thing, creating my content. It's taken away from my time to grow. And what you don't realize is it's the long game. It's the path to actual sustainable, healthy growth that is also missional and true to not just the gospel, but also the Great Commission. The version that just says, I just want to do it my own, like it taking me away from it. That's actually the pathway to addition, far from the multiplication that you need to see the impact that you want to see. Love that. Dalton, thank you so much for coming on the show. Of course, you want, I can give your handles a little bit. I'm sure that you have some social stuff out there that I'm not even aware of because I'm not on it, Dalton. But if you wanted to connect with Dalton, you could certainly join our Discord. It is just discord.gg/Lux Digital Church. You can go to our website, luxdigitalchurch.com, and grab the Discord. He's Are you Pastor Dalton or Pastor Druzi in the server?
Either or. Yeah. Everyone calls me Druzi. It's a kid nickname. That's actually my Discord name as well. But yeah, you could do that, or you could email me at dalton@luxdigitalchurch.com. I would love to chat with you. I love connecting with other churches and other leaders and connecting each other and resourcing however we can. So I'd love to help.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the NCMU podcast. We'll be back here in a couple of weeks with another episode. And then in the future, I'm going to be bringing on Pastor Andy, our creative pastor at Lux. Yeah. And also Greg, our video director, for his first ever podcast thing with Lux. And we're going to be talking about telling really great stories through filming and editing, and how you can tell really great stories about your mission and your heart. Yeah, which I'm super pumped about. So he's going to be on here soon. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.